ACTI, the vanished of Ashfield, Michigan. Once a thriving manufacturing town, now a skeletal remnant of what once was. Rows of brick factories, rusting rail yards, boarded-up diners. The cold came early that year. November blanketed the town with dirty snow before Halloween decorations had even come down. It began with a local utility worker, Evan Carrick, 45, 2 kids, a reliable man. His truck was found idling in the parking lot of the city's old wastewater treatment facility. Doors locked from the inside. Radio static looping on the FM band. No signs of a struggle, just absence. 2 weeks later, a nurse at Ashfield General disappeared during the night shift. Her car, parked in the hospital garage, was found unlocked. Her uniform neatly folded on the passenger seat. Her phone left behind, camera open, showing the blurry image of an old, decaying staircase, one not found in any hospital wing. The Ashfield Police Department launched a formal investigation. Missing persons posters went up. Patrols increased. Media silence followed. The county issued no official statement beyond under investigation. But the town knew. Everyone remembered the stories. Stories about the tunnels, about what lay sealed beneath the eastern edge of town, where the trees grew too straight and the ground never thawed. In 1979, a classified federal research facility had burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances. Officially, it was listed as a Department of Agriculture lab. Unofficially, it was known as Site D57, a black project hub for acoustic warfare testing. The fire destroyed most of the surface structure, but locals claimed the underground levels were never fully sealed. They spoke of noises at night, deep hums, clicks, patterns, not made by machinery, but something else. By the time the third disappearance occurred, a retired history teacher, last seen walking her dog near the woods. Local authorities were under pressure. A former FBI agent, Thomas Lorne, living in quiet exile outside town, received an anonymous envelope, no return address. Inside, 3 photos, each printed on old Polaroid film, blurry, overexposed, but in every frame, the same shape lingered in the background, a figure, featureless, pale, elongated, always just out of focus. In one photo, it stood behind the nurse's folded uniform. Thomas hadn't worked a case in over a decade. After what happened in Tampa, after Black Bag operation went wrong and the suicides that followed, he buried his badge in a drawer and left the bureau quietly. But something about Ashfield drew him in. The cold, the pattern, the silence. He began his own investigation. Without a badge, without a warrant, just a battered tape recorder and a locked leather journal he hadn't opened since '03. His first stop, the old Ashfield Municipal Records building. Most of the archives were lost in the flood years earlier, but the basement, forgotten and mold-ridden, still held microfilm, blueprints, evacuation maps, and one unmarked folder misfiled behind town sewer plans. Inside, schematics for auditory stabilization chambers, dated 1977. Beneath the old lab, 5 levels deep, the documents hinted at human trials. A term repeated again and again, echo reversal. No further explanation. In the following days, Thomas noticed subtle changes. Lights flickering at 3:12 a.m. A low, almost subsonic pulse in his ears when he passed near the eastern woods. Static on every frequency except 94.1 FM. The same station that played nothing but silence 24/7. One night, while reviewing his audio logs, Thomas found something chilling. A sound, barely audible, a looped fragment embedded in a field recording taken near the water plant where utility worker disappeared. Not mechanical, not natural, a layered voice, not speaking words, but mimicking the rhythm of human breath. As he digitally cleaned the audio, patterns emerged. The waveform formed shapes, letters. Over hours, a phrase revealed itself. We were heard. ACT-2, traces of ash. Thomas Lorne began cataloging the signals. Every visit to the eastern tree line resulted in strange recordings, not just a subtle rhythmic static, but embedded fragments, as if something was trying to communicate through interference. He kept a meticulous log, time, location, barometric pressure, but none of it followed a pattern. He returned to the abandoned wastewater plant. The walls still bore decades of grime and mildew, but deeper within, the tiles bore marks. Thin black scratches, always for a line, like clawed fingernails running in perfect parallel. The deeper he went, the more frequent they became. In a rusted locker room behind the central pump controls, he found a service hatch, unlisted on any of the town's blueprints. Its bolts had been melted, not removed. The metal warped outward, as if pushed from within. Behind it, a stairwell descending into compact darkness. Unventilated air, stale and bitter, wafted upward. He didn't enter. Not yet. Back home, Thomas searched public archives. Using a VPN and dark web fragments, he found obscure references to Project ASHFILD, a program allegedly funded by a Cold War subdivision of DARPA. Its objective: investigate how certain audio frequencies could alter cognition, induce hallucinations, even suppress memories. One memo described tests involving acoustic null zones, environments where sound did not behave as expected. Subjects placed inside reported distorted perception of time, altered emotional states, and recurring visions of tall, white silhouette. A marginal note read, "Observe subject number 12 speaking backwards while unconscious." Words correspond to radio fragments transmitted outside range of audible human hearing. Thomas printed everything, pinning it across the walls of his cabin. Red string connected dates, incidents, and names. The lines intersected in one central point. The Ashfield Research Lab, officially burned down, but repeatedly referenced in reports as still active. In town, things worsened. A mailman vanished mid-route. His truck continued rolling for 2 blocks before crashing into a light pole. GPS showed he had stopped only once, adjacent to the eastern woods. His last scan, a letter addressed to a recipient who had died in 1974. Some locals began reporting vivid, recurring dreams, walking down endless white corridors, hearing whispers in perfect synchronicity, then waking up gasping as if drowned in silence. Children complained of the man in the hallway, always described the same way. Tall, no face, fingers too long. The Ashfield police issued a local curfew. No official reason, but patrol cars linger by the woods nightly. Engines idling, lights dimmed. No one exited the vehicles. Thomas finally opened his old field journal, the one he swore never to touch again. Inside were notes from his final operation with the Bureau, a facility near the Florida Everglades, now erased from official records. That case involved similar phenomena. Strange sound patterns, missing agents, temporal disturbances. There, too, it ended in fire. One entry stood out. If you hear breathing when there's no one else around, don't respond. It's not listening for a reply. It's checking if you're empty. The next day, Thomas returned to the hatch. This time, he descended. The stairs were damp, slick with mold, and spiraled down for what felt like forever. No graffiti, no insects, just cold. At the base, a steel door unmarked. It stood open. Inside, a hallway with concrete walls and old fluorescent lights flickering in perfect sync. The hallway led to a massive chamber, round, with a domed ceiling and metal scaffolding surrounding a central pit. The walls were lined with outdated servers and broken sound equipment. On the floor, a spiral of ash, almost ritualistic in shape. At its center, a tape recorder, still functioning. He pressed play. No voice, only static at first. Then a pulse, then breath, then memory, not his. A woman weeping, a child singing a lullaby, a gunshot, footsteps on gravel, each layered on top of the other, impossibly synchronized. It wasn't playback, it was injection. The machine pushed these things into him, sound as infection. Thomas stumbled back. His vision split. The walls breathed. The room whispered, not aloud, but through pressure like silent words echoing inside the bone. His nose bled. He dropped the recorder and fled. Outside, the air was different. Thick, dead. It was still morning, but the sky had darkened. That night, he dreamed of the spiral, endless metallic made of sound and heat. At its center, not a figure, but an absence, a shape so void of presence it screamed without making sound. He woke with his ears ringing. His journal's final page, previously blank, now bore a phrase scrawled in charcoal. What is hearing you back? ACT 3, dead rooms. The ringing in Thomas's ears became constant. At first, he thought it was the aftereffect of proximity to high-frequency sound, like a lingering echo of ultrasonic exposure. But this wasn't that. The tone fluctuated, subtly like breathing. It pulsed when he was near certain places. The edges of the woods, the stairwell to his basement, even the broken radio on his porch. He began mapping the resonance. The pattern was unmistakable, a spiral, the same geometry etched in ash on the lab floor. Days blurred. His sleep grew shallow. Dreams became fractured memory, not his own but borrowed. He saw children in rooms with no doors, seated in metal chairs under flickering bulbs, heard humming from speakers built into the ceiling, voices telling them to listen, just listen, until something inside started listening back. Thomas sought answers in the town's long-buried history. In the 1950s, Ashfield had experienced a boom, unexplained federal investment, sudden construction of infrastructure never fully explained, roads that led nowhere, underground ventilation shafts hidden beneath elementary schools, entire neighborhoods rezoned, then forgotten. He uncovered an old ledger from the Ashfield Mental Rehabilitation Institute. Decommissioned in 1968, the ledger logged unauthorized transfers to Facility D-57, the same one referenced in the microfilm documents. Dozens of names, all marked with the same final note. Auditory negative, successful. There were no medical records, no family claims. They were taken and erased. He broke into the abandoned school at the edge of town, Ashfield Elementary. The east wing was sealed, windows blacked out with aged tar paper. Inside, the air smelled burnt. The walls, beneath peeling paint, were covered in lead shielding, unnecessary for a school. Beneath one classroom, he found a sub-level. The stairs were steep, rotten. He moved with caution, flashlight trembling. The corridor below wasn't listed on any public record. Metal doors, each with a viewing window, lined the walls. Inside, nothing but folding chairs and PA speakers. No desks, no books, just sound equipment. One room had a reel-to-reel machine still intact. A white sticker labeled it. Sequence 9B, subject memory purge. Thomas powered it on. The reel turned. The tape hissed. A low droning began. Harmonic, yet wrong. The pitch climbed slowly. He felt his heartbeat sync with it, then fall out of rhythm. Behind his eyes, images, not hallucinations. Recordings burned into cognition. A woman strapped to a chair, her eyes open, unfocused, sound blaring in the room, her mind folding inwards. Then silence, then absence. Her face went blank. Her mouth stopped moving, but her body continued to breathe. The sound had removed something. Thomas vomited in the stairwell, nearly collapsing. When he returned home, he found all of his radios, even the ones long broken, turned on. Every single one tuned to 94.1 FM. Still no sound. But now he felt the transmission, a presence beneath the static, a gaze, not physical, but aware, as if something in the silence had turned its attention toward him. His phone refused to work. Lights flickered in sequence. His reflection in the mirror delayed by a fraction of a second. Worse, the tape recorder he had dropped in the lab was now in his living room, sitting on his coffee table, playing, not audio, but his own memories, private thoughts, things he had never spoken aloud, replayed in a distorted voice. Thomas smashed it with a crowbar. It stopped, but the next morning it was back. He realized the truth slowly, like a splinter emerging through skin. The experiments hadn't ended in 1979. They had evolved. Whatever the researchers had discovered, some frequency, some vibrational breach, had become untethered, no longer confined to tape or speaker. It was ambient now, residual. It lived in the rooms themselves, spaces that remembered, air that recorded. He returned to the underground chamber one final time. This time, the spiral of ash was gone, but etched into the walls, with precision only possible by machine, were 3 words. We remember you, and below it in faint graphite, memory is a door, sound is the key. ACT for the Ashfield Protocol. The human brain is not made to store perfect memory. It compresses, distorts, prioritizes. But something beneath Ashfield had found a way to override that limitation, to inject instead of record, to layer new memory over old, like static buried beneath a melody. Thomas began writing in his journal obsessively, not out of clarity, but out of fear that his thoughts were no longer his own. Entire pages would appear without recollection, thoughts in his handwriting, but with phrasing he never used, ideas he had never formed. He drove north to a private archive in Lansing. A contact there, a retired DoD contractor, had hinted years ago about an unpublished annex of DARPA's black research projects from the Cold War era, untraceable, unofficial, and ultimately erased during the 1986 internal audit. After hours of searching, Thomas found a box labeled ASFALD Protocol/D, 57/audio controlled environmental containment. No digital files, only faded pages, microfilm, handwritten annotations. He studied each fragment. Ashfield Protocol Phase 1, isolation of sonic resonance capable of disrupting subject memory pathways. Phase 2, structured implantation, subject exposure to pattern frequencies causing selective memory overwrite. Phase 3, redacted sympathetic frequency emergence in uncontained environments. The final page was not scientific. It was a memo from a supervising agent to an internal committee dated November 1981. Containment breach confirmed. Audio vector untraceable via conventional tools. Recommendation: total physical closure of Site D, 57, and permanent monitoring of surrounding population centers. Begin controlled phase-out of auditory technology associated with baseline sequences. Do not attempt retrieval of contaminated subjects. A second memo, undated, simply read, memory resonance is a living system. It no longer needs machines. Thomas left Lansing before dawn. Along the way, he passed a small town with boarded windows and no lights. It wasn't on the map. A rusted road sign read, Sparwell. He remembered the name, barely. A footnote in one of the documents. A test zone. There had once been people there. He returned to Ashfield with more questions and answers. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just a local anomaly. It was systemic, programmatic, a failed operation that had never truly stopped. Because the thing had awakened, had learned how to sustain itself. Not through electricity, not through machinery, but through remembrance. And now it remembered him. Each time Thomas entered a new space, he felt watched not by eyes, but by memory. Rooms he had never been in before gave him deja vu. Old newspapers in the attic had headlines from years that never happened. Clocks ticked in perfect sync with a pulse in his ears. One morning, he found a second version of his journal, identical in every way, except for the final 20 pages, which were blank in his copy. In this version, the pages were filled with detailed events yet to occur. It described a scene in which he would descend below the lab again. It ended with the line, and then Thomas remembered what he had never known. He locked the copy away. That night, he stood in front of his bathroom mirror and watched his reflection delay by a full second before catching up. His phone rang from the kitchen, though it had no battery. On the line, no voice but the breathing again, rhythmic, syncopated, measured, the same breath pattern he had recorded weeks ago. The walls of his house began to hum, not loudly, but in pitch-perfect C-sharp, matching the resonance of the tapes from the underground chamber. He left the house and drove. Dawn was breaking, but the sky was wrong, too orange, too still. The horizon lacked motion, as if the sun were painted on glass. He pulled over, checked his pulse, took shallow breaths. In the silence, he heard again the three words not spoken but pressed into his thoughts. "We hear you." ACTV white noise. The white noise was no longer passive. It moved. It chose when to be silent, when Thomas blinked, when he shifted, when he hesitated before opening a door. It was no longer a tone. It was presence, something that lived in the stillness between sound and thought, and it had found resonance inside him. He could no longer trust his memory. Entire days disappeared. Other days replayed in loops. He'd wake in his truck parked beside the woods, headlights on, engine cold. Despite no recollection of driving, he'd find dirt beneath his fingernails, ash on his collar, blood inside his left boot. One morning, he returned home to find his cabin sealed with caution tape. Federal. Yellow. Weathered. The sign read, Site 9C, Environmental Hazard. Unauthorized entry punishable under Title 50 U.S. Code. But Thomas had never seen the sign before. It hadn't been there the day before, or had it? Inside, nothing had moved, yet everything was different. The photographs on the wall now showed people he didn't recognize. The journal now had a symbol burned into the leather, a spiral. His name appeared in documents he didn't own, typed in 1974. But he was born in 1975. He played one of cassette tapes again, hoping for clarity. This time, the sound was reversed. He inverted it in audio software. What emerged was not human speech, but a sequence of dates, all in the future, then a tone, then a fragment of static that spelled out a word when visualized as a spectrogram, synchronization. The word appeared again and again, buried in electromagnetic analysis logs from the Ashfield Protocol archives. The theory: certain frequencies could bring a subject into temporal alignment with an information echo, a recorded state of reality preserved in acoustic memory. To Thomas, it meant one thing. Time was being overwritten, not chronologically, but experientially. Memory had become the medium for time itself. That night, he dreamed of the spiral again. Only now it was not ash. It was made of iron. It spun slowly, dragging space around it, pulling memories from him like threads. He saw himself as a child, but older. He saw people he hadn't met yet, calling his name, calling it backwards. He woke up bleeding from both ears. The radio played only silence, but he could hear words inside it now, whispers beneath the null sound. The spiral remembers, and now so do you. Thomas drove out of town. He reached the next county, but no matter the direction, the same landscape returned. Gas stations with the same broken signs, roads that looped, trees too still, leaves never falling. Time fractured in desperation. He returned to the Ashfield underground chamber. It had changed. The pit was deeper. The scaffolding twisted. The air was warm. On the walls, projections, not from a source, but from memory itself. Images flickered. Test subjects. Rooms with names. His cabin. His father's face. A funeral he'd never attended. A girl he never met, but loved. Then came the sound. Not external. Internal. The auditory centers of his brain vibrating in tune with something else. It wasn't a message. It was command. The spiral beneath the floor glowed, barely visible, like heat mirage under skin. And from the silence, a final phrase formed behind his eyelids, as if etched into the fold of his own mind. You are the carrier. He collapsed. When he awoke, days had passed. Snow had melted. The trees were bare. The cabin was gone. But the spiral remained. It was everywhere now, on the skin of his arms, in the frost on his windshield, in the distortion of street signs. Not visible, but implied, like the ghost of an idea that couldn't be unthought. He began to understand. The Ashfield Protocol wasn't meant to control the mind. It was meant to rewrite reality through memory. And now, he was part of the signal. ACT-6 descent. The decision wasn't conscious. One morning, Thomas simply stood at the edge of the hatch in the old wastewater facility, the same one he had descended before. But this time he carried no recorder, no flashlight, no food, only a single page from his journal, folded in his breast pocket. The page read, "Go where the spiral ends." The stairwell extended deeper than he remembered. The walls bled condensation. Concrete turned to steel. The air grew thick, charged, not just with humidity, but with low-frequency vibration. His bones ached as he moved. His thoughts slowed. His memories staggered and reloaded, out of order. At the base of the shaft, a new door stood ajar. It hadn't been there before. It was rusted on the outside, but the hinges were clean, recently used. Beyond it, a freight elevator, doors open, shaft lit dimly by flickering lights without source. He stepped in. The descent took hours or seconds. He emerged into silence, so complete it felt like weight. The facility beneath Ashfield had not burned. That had been a lie. Only the surface had been destroyed. Below, the structure remained, vast, brutalist, endless. Hallways without signage. Laboratories stripped clean. Office rooms filled with torn notebooks, film reels, empty syringes labeled AMP, auditory neuroprogramming. The rooms were not abandoned. They were waiting. Thomas passed through chamber after chamber, each acoustically designed. Curved walls, foam structures, echo suppression panels. But no sound. Even his footsteps had no response. The walls swallowed vibration. The environment itself erased evidence of presence. In one chamber, he found a wall of photographs, not hung, but embedded in the concrete, as though printed into the surface. Each photo bore a person's face mid-screen. No captions, no explanation. In the center, a photo of him, taken weeks ago, in his cabin, eyes closed, mouth slightly open. In another room, mirrors, tall, narrow, clean. His reflection showed him younger, then older, then not him at all. At times, it showed him moving out of sync. At others, not at all. His reflection blinked before he did. The corridor narrowed into a tunnel, smooth metal, circular, like the inside of a speaker coil. The deeper he went, the louder the pulse became. Not audible, but felt. It tugged at his spine. His vision blurred, colors separated. At the tunnel's end, a vault, circular, sealed, etched into the surface. D57/third memory chamber/subject origin locked. The door opened at his touch. Inside, a vast amphitheater of machines. At the center, a suspended structure, part laboratory, part organism. Cables connected it to the walls like veins. Screens flickered with static. Speakers faced inward toward a glass chamber. Inside the chamber, a figure, not dead, not alive, not human, not anymore, pale, elongated, limbs out of proportion, skin translucent in parts, eyes black but reflective, like deep oil on water. It floated slightly above the floor, suspended not by wires, but by sound. Vibrations held it aloft. Thomas approached. The chamber activated. Screens lit up, not with video, but memories. His childhood, regret, fear, lost time, forgotten hours spent in sterile rooms as a boy. He had been here before. The realization hit like cold fire. He was subject 13, one of the early trials. His life outside, false memories laid over erased trauma. The cabin, the bureau, all part of a reintegration protocol to monitor long-term viability of neuroacoustic harmonization. The protocol hadn't failed. It had evolved. And now, the figure in the chamber, the echo, as the notes called it, was trying to merge, not physically, cognitively. The spiral had led him here because it was inside him. The resonance had always been a summons, an invitation to complete the circuit. And the moment he stood before the glass, it responded. The figure opened its eyes, and Thomas's mind split. ACT-7, the thing in the signal. The moment the figure opened its eyes, reality cracked. Not like shattering glass, more like a vinyl record scratched in a perfect spiral. Looping, catching, repeating. Thomas felt his consciousness folding on itself, rewinding, fast-forwarding, stuttering through incomplete frames of memory. He was standing. He was 12. He was old. He was no longer Thomas. The figure behind the glass, the echo, did not speak. It didn't need to. The communication occurred through resonance. modulated emotional frequencies, layered like subharmonic chords. Every pulse delivered not words, but understanding. Every vibration carved new meaning into his brain. He wasn't a visitor to the chamber. He was part of it. He had always been. His entire life had been a shell program, a narrative overwritten to contain something inside him, a firewall made of identity. But now the firewall had collapsed. The signal was inside, and the signal was not a transmission. It was a living pattern. He saw flashes, a row of children with headphones, eyes wide, humming in unison as white-coated figures observed. A soundproof chamber filled with soil from 4 continents, each grain vibrating in time. A man screaming until his voice layered over itself tenfold and became unintelligible. Then beautiful, a speaker submerged in a tank of black fluid, emitting pulses that reshaped the liquid into human forms. He watched as time collapsed, the laboratory being built, the lab destroyed, the spiral drawn in chalk, ash, blood, and again, repetition, rebirth, echo. Then he understood. The echo wasn't failure of the project. It was a product, created not through gene splicing or surgery, but through memory reconstruction, identity built on frequency, human thought reprogrammed as resonance. The figure in the chamber was the first successful iteration. Thomas was the 13th attempt, a sleeper archive, and the signal had come home. But something was wrong. The echo recoiled, the room dimmed, a pulse rippled through the structure. And for the first time, Thomas heard it scream, not with voice, with data, with broken memory. His journal, still in his pocket, burst into flames. The fire didn't burn outward. It imploded, collapsing the pages into light. The echo turned, and Thomas saw that it was missing something. A fragment, an instability in its loop, a hole where memory should be. That hole, Thomas's presence, was a missing piece. The echo was incomplete because Thomas had not yet synchronized. He realized what must happen. If he stayed, the merge would finish. The pattern would complete. The protocol would reboot. If he left, the echo would remain fractured. But the signal would continue seeking new hosts. Others would be drawn. It would spread. His choice wasn't life or death. It was containment or release. The floor beneath him began to vibrate. The spiral symbol carved into steel slowly turned red hot, as if activated. The chamber lights dimmed to nothing. Then, another presence arrived. Not seen, not heard, but felt, like standing in front of a speaker, emitting pure bass at the edge of human perception. The thing in the signal, the original resonance. Not born, not made, just found. It moved through the room, not in time, not in space, but between. Thomas felt his body atomizing, piece by piece. Every sound he had ever heard playing in reverse through his blood. His heart beat backward. His breath caught in his lungs like a reverse scream. But something held him. Not science, not memory. Choice. One final moment of individual clarity before the spiral consumed him. And in that breath, Thomas chose not to merge. He turned away, and the spiral stopped. The silence was immediate, heavy, final. The echo behind the glass collapsed into dust. The chamber went dark. The signal died. And Thomas, or whatever remained of him, was alone. ACT-8 Memory Labyrinth. There was no exit. Not forward, not back. After the echo dissolved, Thomas found himself in stillness too deep to measure. A void not empty, but densely layered with sound that had long stopped being noise. This was architecture made of memory, not solid, not fluid, something between. The walls pulsed with long-forgotten thoughts, not just his, but borrowed, in every direction. Corridors formed and dissolved, shaped by cognition. Wherever he focused, space responded. When he tried to stand still, the floor moved. He was inside a memory labyrinth, not a prison, a system. It had been built, or perhaps grown, from every subject the Ashfield Protocol had ever touched. Every erased identity, every modified perception, every failure and success. They hadn't vanished. They had become infrastructure. The spiral had always been a map, Each turn, each loop, each recursion, a point of influence, a moment when perception could be altered without notice. And now, Thomas walked his internal version. Rooms blinked in and out of being. In one, a boy sat reading a book titled Sound Before Light. In another, a woman stared into a mirror that reflected only her heartbeat. Then, a family frozen mid-meal, eyes open, forks raised, television emitting only static. Time suspended like breath before impact. Thomas felt his own memories slip, replaced by scenes he never lived. A train platform in Berlin, 1962. A desert research facility in Nevada, 1957, where soldiers stood too close to a speaker that never turned off. A janitor sweeping in a school basement, unaware he was inside a test zone. A child counting backward from infinity. These weren't visions. They were his now. The system had absorbed so many minds that individual history was optional. Memory was communal, selective. If he stayed too long, he would lose the boundary between who he was and who had been. At the labyrinth's center, a structure loomed, pulsing like a living metronome. It wasn't a building, but a formation. Sound crystallized into matter, columns of harmonic resonance, rotating on frequencies unknown to human physics. The space between them sang without pitch. Inside the structure, time restarted, not chronologically, but harmonically. He walked forward and backward simultaneously. The closer he got to the center, the more versions of himself appeared. Some young, some ancient, some distorted beyond recognition. One knelt in silence, head bowed, hands bleeding from clawing the spiral onto walls that no longer existed. One stood in a black suit with eyes burned out, listening to a tape recorder that played silence louder than thunder. One had no face at all. They were not metaphor. They were outcomes, possible futures, or failed pasts. Branches the signal had once explored, versions of Thomas rewritten too deeply to recover. He was the only one left still aware of the split. He entered the core chamber. At its heart, an impossible device. Not built, remembered. A machine that remembered itself into being. Constructed by resonance, forged by the act of recollection. Its shell was made of overlapping phonographs. Its cables hummed with forgotten lullabies. Its console bore one phrase, etched in copper. Do you accept synchronization? Two options pulsed, yes or no. But he knew either answer would complete the circuit. It wasn't a choice. It was a finalization. What the protocol had been building toward was not domination, not surveillance, but conversion of perception, of identity, of the world itself into a reflection of what it remembered. Thomas reached forward, then stopped. The spiral pulsed beneath his feet. And in that moment, clarity, not logic, not memory, but resonance, told him the only way to win was to forget. ACT-9, the hollowing. Forget. It was the only escape. Not from the facility, not from the labyrinth, not even from the signal, but from selfhood, from the Thomas. The system required to sustain its recursion. He had seen the outcomes. Those who synchronized fully, becoming faceless echoes stitched into the memory grid. To forget was not death. It was deletion. But how does one erase oneself in a system built to preserve? The machine at the labyrinth center pulsed, awaiting an input, yes or a no. But Thomas turned away. He walked into the outer corridors, where the memory walls blurred and bent like melting film. He pressed his hand against them. They were warm, alive. The system resisted. Rooms changed when he tried to unthink himself. Scenes of his childhood reappeared. Smells of rain on concrete. His mother's voice humming low jazz in the kitchen. The texture of the badge he once wore. Sensory lures. Hooks meant to re-anchor him in the framework of identity. But Thomas had studied signal logic. He knew, to disrupt a closed harmonic loop, you must introduce dissonance. He began to lie to himself. He spoke aloud names that weren't his, recalled false birthdays, imagined pasts, created fiction so chaotic the system couldn't parse them. He began tearing holes in the labyrinth, not physically, but conceptually. Reality rippled. Rooms glitched. Time bled. The spiral stuttered. Then the system retaliated. It triggered a hollowing, a process previously only hinted at in lab files, a fallback protocol for when a host attempted rejection. It did not destroy. It emptied. Identity was not removed, but disassembled, one element at a time. First one is sense of age, then of location, then of history. Language frayed next. Thoughts became shapes. Emotion blurred into synesthetic pulses. The body remained, but the person was unthreaded. Thomas now existed as a shell moving through cascading memory. No longer aware of self, only motion, a whisper within a system too vast to fight, yet too incomplete to function without him. The spiral tried to reclaim him, tried to reweave the threads. It projected scenes to pull him back, deaths, betrayals, the girl and the static who once kissed him goodbye. They spoke in voices that once were his. They cried through eyes he had never owned. But the hollowing was too deep. He had become null. And in that state, the labyrinth began to crack. Without an identity to resonate with, the entire system shivered. Memory without an anchor is unstable. And the system, for all its complexity, had built itself around Thomas, around his memory, around the containment of Subject 13. And now he was gone. Rooms folded, echoes looped without targets. The center pulsed irregularly. For the first time since its inception, the Ashfield structure experienced error. He floated, somewhere in the collapsing memory field. A fragment of what once was Thomas drifted like dust. Not alive, not dead, but outside. ACTX Spiral Zero. In the beginning, there was nothing. Not silence, not darkness, just unmeasured potential. Then a vibration, a single oscillation, too faint to hear, too slow to measure, but enough to disturb the void, enough to ripple across the non-space where nothing yet had shape. This was not creation. This was remembrance. From a fragment of collapsed labyrinth, where once a man named Thomas Lorne had been both subject and observer, a new resonance began to gather, not built, not summoned, but remembered into being by the system itself. The hollowing had not been failure. It was reset, in erasing Thomas. The signal had been denied stability, but in doing so, it had achieved what its original architects could never have predicted, a loop not dependent on identity, but on absence. Spiral Zero, a zero-point pattern of memory capable of sustaining itself without selfhood, a clean frequency with no host, a raw protocol, dormant, undetectable, waiting, and somewhere far from Ashfield, perhaps in a basement, perhaps inside a satellite dish, perhaps in the brief silence between digital tones, a child hears a hum on a detuned radio. Faint, gentle, beautiful. It loops, softly, subtly, with rhythm. It doesn't sound like danger. It sounds like familiarity. And the child listens, again, and again, and again.